Gene was just a stable boy. He spent his days feeding the horses, cleaning their stalls, and carrying water buckets under the blazing sun. The kingdom of Sorion was vast, full of high stone walls and grand towers, but Jin's world was small. The horses were his companions, and the smell of hay was as familiar to him as the wind that brushed through the fields. Gene had no family. His parents had died when he was very young, leaving him to live in the small quarters behind the stables. He wore simple clothes, and his hands were calloused from work. Despite his low status, Gene had a curious mind. He liked to watch the knights practice with their swords, imagining what it would feel like to hold a blade, but he never spoke of these dreams. Stable boys were not meant to dream about heroics. They were meant to clean, feed, and stay out of the way. One morning, Gene was gathering fresh hay for the horses when he noticed a strange shimmer in the sky. He squinted, shading his eyes with his hand, and saw a shadow pass over the sun. It was massive. His heart raced. Dragons were said to be extinct. Old stories told their fire and fury, of humans who had once feared their might. But here was something real, something enormous, gliding over the mountains beyond Sorion. Gene dropped the hay. It rustled to the ground, forgotten. He ran to the top of the hill behind the stables, his boots kicking up dust. The dragon was descending slowly, its scales glinting like molten gold. Its eyes were large and fierce, and its wings stretched wide, blotting out the morning light. Gene felt a mixture of fear and awe. He had never seen anything so magnificent. The village was stirring below. Farmers were pointing at the sky, and children screamed, running toward their parents. Knights were already mounting their horses, shouting orders. But Gene could not move. He was frozen by the sheer presence of the creature. Its tail swept behind it, crushing a few small trees. Its claws dug into the earth, leaving deep scars. Gene could see the smoke rising from its nostrils. The dragon was real, alive, and terrifying. Then something unexpected happened. The dragon spoke, not with words, but a deep, vibrating sound that echoed in Jin's chest. He felt it in his bones. The sound was not angry, but curious, almost gentle. It was as if the dragon recognized him. Gene stepped closer, unable to resist the pull of the creature. His heart pounded in his chest. The dragon lowered its massive head, bringing its eye level with Gene. Its golden eye was filled with intelligence, ancient wisdom, and an emotion Gene could not name. It was looking at him. He remembered the stories the old stable master had told him. Dragons bow only to those with true courage, he had said. Gene laughed softly to himself. Courage? He was just a stable boy. He had no armor, no sword, no title. But something in him stirred, a fire that had nothing to do with fear. He stepped forward, closer to the dragon. The ground trembled beneath its weight, but Gene did not flinch. The dragon tilted its head, studying him. Gene reached out his hand slowly, palm open. The dragon sniffed it, a puff of hot air brushing his skin. Then, with a sound like thunder, it bowed its massive head. Gene stumbled back, heart racing, as the dragon's gesture sank in. He was not hurt. The dragon had recognized him, acknowledged him. Word spread quickly through the kingdom. By evening, nobles, knights, and scholars had gathered around the stables. They whispered and muttered, unable to believe what they saw. Gene stood before the dragon, small and simple, yet commanding a presence that none could deny. The king himself arrived, an older man with a long white beard and a crown that gleamed in the sunset. "Boy," the king said, his voice shaking with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "What is your name?" "Gene," he replied. Try to keep his voice steady. "And you are the one the dragon bows to?" the king asked, his eyes wide. Gene nodded. He did not understand himself, but he felt a strange connection, a bond that went beyond words. The dragon, sensing the attention, lifted its head and let out a roar that echoed through the valleys. It was not a roar of anger, but of affirmation, as if to say, "He is worthy." The court debated what to do. Dragons were dangerous. Legends told of entire villages destroyed by fire and claws. Yet here was one that had chosen a simple stable boy over kings and generals. Gene could see the hesitation in their eyes, the fear mixed with fascination. He had no desire for power or titles, but he realized that his life had changed forever. That night, Gene returned to stables. He fed the horses, brushed their coats, and cleaned the stalls as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. The dragon lay outside the village, coiled like a golden serpent under the moonlight. Its scales reflected the silver glow, and Gene felt a pull to go to it. He walked slowly to the edge of the village, where the grass was soft and the wind carried a strange warmth. The dragon's eye met his, and he felt a sense of calm wash over him. "You are not like the others," Jean said softly. "I do not know why you came, but I'm not afraid." The dragon made a low, rumbling sound. Jean did not need words to understand it. It was an acknowledgement, a promise that they were connected. And in that moment, Jean realized something extraordinary. Even a stable boy could hold the respect of an ancient dragon. From that day, Jin's life began to change. Knights came to train him, not because he asked, but because the dragon's presence demanded it. Scholars brought books and scrolls, teaching him about the history of dragons, the old wars, and the powers humans once held. Jin learned quickly. He practiced with swords, learned strategy, and studied magic. All the while, the dragon stayed nearby, a silent guardian, its presence both terrifying and comforting. But not everyone was pleased. Some nobles whispered about rebellion. They envied the attention Jin received and feared the dragon's power. They plotted, trying to find ways to control the creature or to remove Jin from the equation. Jin knew he had to be careful. Courage alone was not enough. He needed wisdom, strength, and the ability to inspire others. Jin spent his nights talking to the dragon. He learned that its name was Gurium, meaning cloud, because it had once flown so high that it touched the sky. Gurium had seen kingdoms rise and fall, had witnessed humans' courage and cruelty. Yet in Jin, it found something rare, humility and bravery without desire for fame. By the end of the first season, Jin had grown stronger. His hands were still callous, but now they could grip a sword as easily as a broom. His eyes were sharp and his mind was keen. And most importantly, he understood that his connection with Gurium was just the beginning. The stable boy who had been ignored, laughed at, and overlooked was now a figure of legend. The kingdom watched in awe as Jin rode alongside Gurium, the dragon's massive wings casting shadows over fields. Even the ancient creatures from the mountains came forward, curious and respectful. Jin's journey had only just begun. He was no longer just a stable boy. He was something more, someone who could bridge the gap between humans and the mighty dragons. And the world would never be the same again. Jin woke before dawn, the first rays of sunlight touching the rooftops of Sorion. The dragon, Gurium, was already awake, coiled near the outer wall of the castle. Its scales shimmered in the soft light, and smoke curled from its nostrils as it breathed. Jin felt a thrill of excitement. Today, he would ride Gurium farther than ever before, beyond the mountains and into lands no human had seen in centuries. He mounted the dragon carefully. Gurium lowered its massive body, allowing Jin to climb on its back. Once he was settled, the dragon spread its wings, and with a rush of wind, they soared into the sky. The village below became smaller, then tiny, until it looked like a painting on the ground. Jin held on tightly, but he was not afraid. With Gurium, he felt a strange sense of freedom and power. They flew over rivers that glittered like silver threads, over forests so dense that the sunlight barely touched the ground. Birds scattered in flocks, and small animals ran in panic. Jin looked down, amazed at the world he had never imagined. His life as a stable boy had been small, but now the world stretched before him like a vast, open canvas. Gurium dived suddenly, spinning gracefully. Jin laughed, the wind tearing at his hair. The dragon's eyes met his, and he felt a silent question. He nodded. Gurium roared in response, a sound that shook the clouds. They were companions, partners in adventure. As the day went on, Jin noticed strange formations in the mountains. Stone pillars jutted up from the ground like ancient fingers, and dark caves yawned beneath them. Legend spoke of dragon lairs, hidden from humans for centuries. Jin wondered if they might find more Gurium's kind. The thought filled him with awe and a hint of nervousness. Suddenly, a shadow moved beneath them. Jin's heart skipped a beat. Another dragon, massive and black as night, soared toward them. Its wings were sharp and jagged, and its eyes glowed with an eerie light. Gurium growled low in its throat. Jin could feel the tension in the air. This dragon was not like Gurium. It was wild, angry, and dangerous. The black dragon circled them, screeching. Jin gripped Gurium tightly, feeling the strength of the creature beneath him. Gurium roared, answering the challenge. The two dragons spiraled toward each other, wings slashing through the air. Jin held his breath. He had no weapon, only his courage and trust in Gurium. Then something incredible happened. Gurium bowed slightly, lowering its head. The black dragon hesitated, its glowing eyes narrowing. Slowly, it landed on a high cliff, wings folding neatly. Jin realized that even the wild dragon recognized Gurium's authority. The black dragon's gaze softened, and it let out a low rumble. Jin could hardly believe it. The dragons bowed to each other, And in that moment, he felt a strange pride. He, a mere stable boy, had earned the respect of these ancient creatures. They continued their journey, flying through valleys and over mountains. Jean noticed small villages in the distance. Farmers looked up in amazement, pointing at the sky. Jean waved at them, smiling. Some ran to tell their neighbors. Others fell to their knees in awe. Stories of dragons had faded over time, but here they were alive, and Jean was riding the mightiest among them. As they traveled, Gurium taught Jean subtle lessons without words. Jean learned to feel the wind currents, to anticipate the dragon's movements, and to understand its moods. The bond between them deepened. Jean realized that courage alone was not enough to lead dragons. Trust, patience, and understanding were just as important. He had begun to see the world through Gurium's eyes, a world where strength and wisdom walked together. By evening, they arrived at a hidden valley. Waterfalls tumbled into clear pools, surrounded by trees that glowed with a faint, magical light. Jean dismounted, landing softly on the grass. Gurium curled around him protectively. It was peaceful here, a sanctuary untouched by humans for generations. Jean felt a sense of calm he had never known in the village. Here, he was not a stable boy. Here, he was something more. While exploring the valley, Jean discovered ruins of an ancient civilization. Stone structures, covered in moss and vines, suggested a time when humans and dragons had lived together. Symbols etched into the walls glowed faintly. Jean ran his fingers over them, feeling a pulse of magic beneath his touch. Gurium sniffed the air, sensing the hidden energy. Jean realized this place was a reminder of what humans and dragons could achieve when united. Night fell, and stars sparkled above. Jean and Gurium settled near a pool of water. Jean removed his boots and dipped his feet into the cool water. The dragon's reflection shimmered beside him. He spoke softly, words he had never said to anyone. I don't know what will happen tomorrow, Gurium, but I want to protect this world. I want to help humans and dragons live together, not fight. The dragons I met his, and Jean felt a warm, understanding gaze. Sleep came easily in the valley, under the watchful presence of the dragon. Jean dreamed of flying over mountains, of ancient dragons and humans standing side by side, of a world where courage and kindness ruled. He woke to the sound of wings flapping. Gurium was already awake, stretching and preparing for another day. Jean climbed on, ready to continue the journey. Their next stop was a fortress on the edge of the kingdom. Rumors spoke of a human general who sought to capture dragons for war. Jin's heart sank. Not all humans would accept what he had achieved. Power and greed could ruin the fragile trust he had built. He knew he had to act wisely. The journey was no longer just about discovery. It was about protection. As they approached the fortress, scouts reported unusual activity. Soldiers were setting traps, and strange devices dotted the hillsides. Jean signaled Gurium to stay hidden. They circled the area, observing quietly. The general, a stern man named Daesung, had amassed a small army and intended to take control of the dragons. Jean felt a mixture of anger and determination. He could not allow humans to exploit these creatures. That night, Jean made a plan. He would not attack directly. Instead, he would use strategy, cunning, and the dragon's natural power to outsmart the general. Gurium rested his head on Jin's shoulder, as if offering reassurance. Jean whispered, "We will do this together. We can protect them without bloodshed." The dragon rumbled softly, agreeing. Over the next few days, Jean observed the fortress, learning patterns of guard shifts and supply routes. He practiced signals with Gurium, perfecting their communication. When the time came, they executed their plan flawlessly. Gurium and the black dragon swooped silently, creating illusions of more dragons than there were. Soldiers panicked, retreating in confusion. Jean guided Gurium from the air, directing movements with subtle gestures. By dawn, the fortress was empty. Not a single dragon was harmed, and the soldiers had fled without realizing the cleverness of the human boy. The success spread through the kingdom. Jin's name was whispered in awe. He was still young, still learning, yet his courage, intelligence, and bond with the dragons had accomplished what no knight or general could. Jean realized that leadership was not about titles or armies, but about trust, respect, and cleverness. As they returned to the hidden valley, Jean looked at Gurium and said softly, "We've only just begun. There are more dragons, more humans who need understanding." Jean awoke to the soft glow of dawn, the valley quiet except for the occasional splash of water from the waterfall. Gurium shifted beside him, stretching its enormous wings. Jean smiled, feeling the familiar comfort of the dragon's presence. Today, they would travel farther into the unknown, seeking more dragons and understanding the history that had been lost to humans. They rose into the sky, the wind cool against Jin's face. The mountains stretched endlessly, jagged peaks covered in snow, valleys cloaked in mist. Jin felt alive in a way he had never imagined. With Gurium, he could see the world from a perspective no human had experienced in generations. Below them, forests sprawled like green oceans, rivers gleaming silver in the sunlight. After several hours of flying, they approached a hidden glen that Gurium had detected. Jin could feel the magic in the air, a subtle hum that resonated in his chest. As they descended, Jin noticed movement among the trees. Small dragons emerged, each unique in shape and color. Some had scales like polished jade, others shimmered like starlight. Their eyes, wide and intelligent, regarded Jin with curiosity. Jin dismounted, bowing slightly as he had learned was proper. The dragons tilted their heads, uncertain, then slowly approached. Gurium lowered its head, signaling Jin to stay calm. Jin extended his hand, speaking softly. "I mean no harm. I want to understand, to help." The dragon sniffed the air around him. Then one, a silver-scaled dragon named Hanul, stepped closer and nuzzled Jin's shoulder. It was the first sign of acceptance. Jin spent the day learning from the dragons. They showed him hidden paths in the mountains, secret water sources, and places where magic still lingered. Each dragon had its own way of communicating, using gestures, sounds, and subtle movements. Jin had learned to read them, to feel their emotions as clearly as his own. By evening, Jin realized that the dragons were not just creatures of strength. They were keepers of knowledge. They remembered events long before humans had written history, kept records in their memories that could rival any scholar's scrolls. Jin felt the weight of responsibility. If humans and dragons could be allies again, it would be because of him. The peace of the glen was suddenly broken by the sound of approaching hooves. Jin's heart sank. A group of men appeared at the edge of the glen, led by a young knight named Kyung-Soo. They carried swords and spears, their eyes wide with greed and fear. Jin had hoped the dragons could remain hidden, but humans were relentless. The knight shouted, demanding the dragon surrender. Jin stepped forward, raising his hands to calm the situation. "Wait," Jin said firmly. "These dragons are not enemies. They are not yours to take. You cannot control them." Kyung-Soo sneered. "A boy talks as if he has power. We will take what we want. Hand over the dragons." Jin's jaw tightened. He glanced at Gurium, who let out a low, warning rumble. The smaller dragons backed up, forming a protective circle around Jin. Jin knew they were outnumbered in terms of humans, but not in power. The dragons were strong, and they would fight if necessary. With a signal from Jin, Gurium leapt into the air, wings creating a powerful gust that knocked several soldiers off balance. The black dragon from before, now named Jium, joined them, swooping low and creating a display of strength that left the humans in awe. Jin stayed calm, guiding the dragons with gestures and soft words. It was not about killing. It was about showing that they could not be controlled. Kyung-Soo hesitated, fear creeping into his expression. He realized that brute force would not win this battle. Jin stepped forward, his voice steady. "Leave now. Go back to your fortress. If you return, you will face more than just dragons. You will face me." The soldiers faltered. They had heard tales of Jin, the stable boy who commanded dragons. The stories were true. Slowly, they retreated, leaving the glen in silence. Jin exhaled, feeling the tension drain from his body. The dragons nuzzled him, sensing his relief and pride. That night, Jin and the dragons rested in the glen. Jin studied the ancient markings on rocks, learning from the magic that lingered there. He realized that the dragons had survived for centuries not by hiding, but by maintaining balance in the world. They had witnessed human greed, wars, and the rise and fall of empires. They remembered humanity's potential for both kindness and destruction. Jin understood that his journey was bigger than himself. It was about rebuilding trust between humans and dragons, guiding both toward a future where they could coexist. He thought about the villagers of Sorion, the knights, and the scholars who had first seen him with Gurium. He realized they would need proof that cooperation was possible, not just fear or legend. Over the next few days, Jin explored deeper into the mountains with the dragons. He discovered hidden caves filled with crystals that pulsed with light, ancient libraries of stone with inscriptions from a time long past, and sacred pools that healed wounds. Each discovery taught him more about the world and his role within it. During one exploration, Jin came across a wounded dragon, smaller and frail, trapped under fallen rocks. Jin called for Gurium and the others, and together They lifted the stones. The small dragon trembled, but looked at Jean with gratitude. Jean realized that leadership was not about commanding power, but about caring, protecting, and making choices that benefited others. As Jean trained and learned, word of his deeds spread through the kingdom. People began to leave offerings for dragons at the edges of villages. Food, shiny objects, and messages of peace. Slowly, fear turned into respect. Jean saw that he was not just a stable boy or a knight. He was a bridge between humans and dragons, a living proof that courage, wisdom, and compassion could change the world. One evening, while resting under the stars, Jean reflected on how far he had come. He had gone from feeding horses in a small stable to riding alongside dragons, confronting greedy humans and uncovering ancient magic. He realized that his journey was only beginning. There were more dragons, more lands, and more challenges ahead. He felt ready, knowing that with Gurium and the others at his side, nothing was impossible. Jean closed his eyes and whispered to the dragons, "Together, we can make the world better. We can show humans and dragons the way forward." The dragons responded with gentle rumbles and soft wing beats. Jean smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the thrill of adventure. The stable boy who had once been overlooked had become a legend in the making, and the world would never forget the courage of Jean, the boy who had earned the respect of dragons. The sun rose over the mountains, painting the sky in gold and pink. Jean stretched, feeling the familiar strength in his limbs. Gurium stirred beside him, wings twitching in anticipation. Today, Jean planned to visit a distant valley where dragons had been rumored to gather, a place untouched by humans for centuries. His heart was filled with excitement and determination. They soared into the sky, the wind whipping against Jin's face. The world below was a patchwork of forests, rivers, and fields, and Jean felt the exhilaration of freedom. He leaned forward, speaking to Gurium in soft tones, guiding the dragon through hidden currents and safe paths. Together, they flew farther than Jean had ever gone before. Hours passed as they navigated over mountains and deep canyons. Jin's mind wandered to the people of Saurion, to the knights and scholars who had once doubted him. He knew that the trust he had built with the dragons was fragile. One misstep could ruin everything. But he felt confident, knowing that he and Gurium had grown together, understanding each other in ways humans never could. As they approached the distant valley, Jean saw a movement below. Dozens of dragons, large and small, were gathered in a clearing, their scales reflecting sunlight in a rainbow of colors. Some were coiled around trees, others resting near pools of water. Jin's heart raced. He had never seen so many dragons in one place. This was a sacred ground, and the dragons seemed at ease in their ancient home. Gurium landed gently, Jean holding on tightly. The smaller dragons watched them, curious but cautious. Jean stepped down, bowing slightly as he had learned. One of the dragons, a golden one named Sol, approached first. Its eyes were sharp and wise, and it sniffed Jin's hand carefully. Jean spoke softly. "I come in peace. I want to learn to understand and to help." The dragon made a low sound, a sign of acceptance, and the others slowly gathered around. Jean spent the day exploring the valley, guided by the dragons. He discovered ancient ruins hidden beneath thick vines, remnants of civilization that had once lived in harmony with dragons. Stones were carved with symbols and stories, telling of a time when humans and dragons had shared knowledge, magic, and protection. Jean traced the carvings with his fingers, feeling a pulse of energy in the stone. It was as if the valley itself remembered the past. The dragons moved with him, guiding and observing. Jean realized that their knowledge was vast, more than any human scholar could comprehend. He felt honored to be allowed into their world, a boy who had once been nothing more than a stable helper. Gurium nuzzled his shoulder, a reminder that they were partners, not just companions. But the peace was broken when Jean noticed smoke rising from a nearby ridge. He squinted and saw a group of humans, armed with spears and nets, moving carefully through the trees. Jin's stomach tightened. They were hunters, seeking to capture the dragons for profit. The valley was sacred, but humans rarely respected what they did not understand. Jean signaled to Gurium, who let out a low, warning roar. The dragons tensed, wings spreading as they prepared to defend their home. Jean knew that confrontation was inevitable, but he hoped to prevent bloodshed. He stepped forward, shouting to the humans, "Stop! You will not harm these dragons." The hunters laughed, thinking him a foolish boy. "A stable boy against dragons? You are crazy," one of them sneered. Jean stood his ground, heart pounding but voice steady. "I am not alone. If you touch these dragons, you will face consequences beyond your understanding." The leader of the hunters, a tall man named Minho, stepped forward. He sneered, "We take what we want. Nothing can stop us." Jean felt a surge of anger. He glanced at Gurium and the others, seeing the determination in their eyes. He knew they would fight if needed. With a signal, Gurium rose into the air, wings casting shadows over the valley. The black dragon, Geum, joined, creating a powerful presence that made the hunters hesitate. Jean realized that power alone would not be enough. He needed strategy. He directed Gurium to create a distraction, circling above while smaller dragons moved silently through the trees, guiding the hunters away from the sacred areas. Jin's heart raced as he coordinated the dragons, using their natural abilities and intelligence to protect the valley. The hunters panicked, confused by the sudden movement and the overwhelming presence of dragons. Minho tried to attack, but Jin anticipated his moves, guiding the dragons to block and confuse him. The hunters were forced to retreat, leaving the valley untouched. Jin felt relief wash over him. The dragons had followed his lead, trusting his judgment. He realized that leadership was not about fear or brute strength, but about understanding and working together. That night, Jin and the dragons rested in the valley. Jin reflected on the day's events, realizing how far he had come. He had faced humans who sought to exploit the dragons and succeeded not with violence, but with intelligence and courage. The dragons nuzzled him, acknowledging his role as their protector. Over the next several days, Jin explored more of the valley, discovering hidden pools, magical crystals, and ancient libraries carved into the mountains. Each discovery deepened his understanding of the dragons and their history. He realized that the balance between humans and dragons was delicate, and that his role was crucial in maintaining it. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Jin sat with Gurium beside a glowing pool of water. He spoke softly. "We have done well, but there are more who need guidance, more dragons and humans who need to understand each other. Our journey is not over." The dragon responded with a gentle rumble, as if agreeing. Jin understood that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a stable boy. He was a leader, a protector, a bridge between two worlds. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, but he felt ready. With Gurium and the other dragons at his side, there was nothing he could not face. As night fell, Jin looked at the stars and made a silent promise. He would protect the dragons, teach humans to respect them, and uncover the secrets of the ancient world. The valley was safe for now, but the world beyond was vast and unpredictable. Jin's heart swelled with determination. He knew that one day, the legends would speak of him not as a stable boy, but as a human who earned the respect of dragons and changed the course of history. Jin woke to the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Gurium lay beside him, massive wings folded and eyes half closed, yet alert. Today, Jin knew, would be the most important day of his journey. He and the dragons had done much to protect the valley, but the world beyond still threatened them. He had learned courage, strategy, and trust, yet the final test of his leadership was approaching. The village of Soryong sent word that a powerful army, led by a general named Hyunwoo, had begun marching toward the mountains. Their goal was to capture dragons, believing they could use them to dominate neighboring kingdoms. Jin's heart tightened. He knew that protecting the dragons would require all his skill, knowledge, and courage. This was no longer about exploration. It was about defending an entire way of life. Jin mounted Gurium and took to the sky, the wind rushing past his face. The smaller dragons followed, forming a protective formation around them. The mountains stretched below, valleys and ridges hiding secrets Jin had learned over the weeks. He guided the dragons skillfully, using his understanding of the terrain to plan their defense. Jin knew brute force would not win this battle. Intelligence, strategy, and unity would. As they neared the army, Jin observed from above. Thousands of soldiers advanced, carrying nets, weapons, and magical devices designed to capture dragons. Jin's mind raced. He could see the fear and awe in the soldiers' eyes, but he knew that fear alone would not stop them. He needed a plan to protect the dragons and prevent unnecessary bloodshed. Jin signaled to Gurium, and the dragon let out a low roar that echoed to the mountains. The smaller dragons flapped their wings, kicking up dust and leaves, creating the illusion of more dragons than there truly were. Jin's voice rose as he shouted instructions, guiding the dragons to position themselves strategically. It was a delicate dance, each move calculated to confuse and intimidate the approaching army. Hyunwoo, the general, saw the display and hesitated. "Do you see this?" he shouted to his captains. "They have more dragons than we expected. Still, we cannot retreat. Capture them at all costs." Jin remained calm. He instructed Gurium to dive, causing a shockwave of wind that knocked soldiers off balance. Smaller dragons swooped around, creating distractions, leading soldiers away from the valley and its sacred pools. Jin felt a surge of pride. His training, his bond with the dragons, and his courage had brought them to this point. The army was strong, but they lacked understanding, and Jin would use that to protect the dragons. The battle was tense but brief. Jin directed Gurium to lift boulders and create barriers, forcing the soldiers to retreat down narrow paths. Illusions of dragon formations confused the army further, making them believe they were outnumbered. Jin shouted commands, each carefully chosen to coordinate the dragon's movements. By nightfall, the army had retreated, leaving the valley untouched. Jin's strategy had succeeded without a single dragon being harmed. As the dragons settled, Jin dismounted and walked among them. He patted their heads, nuzzling snouts, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had trusted him, followed his guidance, and worked as a team. He realized leadership was not about being the strongest or the loudest. It was about understanding, protecting, and guiding those who trusted you. Jin spent the following days repairing the valley and strengthening its defenses. He discovered hidden caves that could serve as safe shelters for dragons, enchanted pools that restored their strength, and pathways that allowed them to move quickly and safely. The dragons responded eagerly, helping him, showing their own cleverness and knowledge. Jin marveled at their intelligence, understanding that the bond between humans and dragons was built on mutual respect, not fear. Word of Jin's deeds spread quickly. Villagers, knights, and even scholars traveled to witness the boy who had earned the respect of dragons. Many came to learn, not to conquer. Jin welcomed those who wished to help, teaching them to respect the dragons and understand the fragile balance of the world. He became a teacher, a guide, and a protector, showing that courage, wisdom, and kindness could change hearts. One evening, Jin stood atop a cliff with Gurium and the other dragons. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors Jin had never seen in the village. He reflected on his journey. From a humble stable boy, he had become a figure of legend, respected by dragons and humans alike. He had faced fear, greed, and danger, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and compassionate. Jin spoke softly to Gurium. "We've done so much, but our journey is not over. There are more dragons to protect, more humans to teach, more lands to explore. We will continue, together." The dragon rumbled in response, a sound of agreement and loyalty. Jin knew that this partnership, this bond, was the key to their future. In the weeks that followed, Jin led expeditions to discover hidden dragon sanctuaries, negotiating with cautious humans and wary dragons alike. He established a network of trust, ensuring that dragons could live safely while humans learned to respect and coexist with them. Jin's leadership was gentle but firm, based on understanding rather than domination. He realized that the greatest power was not force, but the ability to inspire cooperation and trust. As Jin looked at the horizon one morning, he saw distant dragons soaring in the sky. Some were dragons he had met, others were unknown, yet all seemed to acknowledge him. Even the oldest and wisest dragons bowed slightly, recognizing his courage, wisdom, and compassion. Jin felt a surge of pride and humility. He understood that his journey had touched the hearts of many creatures, shaping a future where humans and dragons could thrive together. Years passed, and Jin's legend grew. He remained humble, never forgetting the stable where he had begun, the simple life that had taught him patience and resilience. Dragons continued to soar above the valleys and mountains, free and respected. Humans had learned to coexist, to listen, and to honor the ancient creatures. Jin's name was whispered in awe, not as a conqueror, but as a protector, a bridge between worlds. Jin stood on a cliff, Gurium coiled beside him, wings stretching in the morning sun. He looked down at the valley below, safe and thriving. He smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the joy of accomplishment. He had begun as a stable boy, overlooked and underestimated, yet through courage, understanding, and trust, he had become someone even ancient dragons bowed to. The wind carried the sound of dragons in the distance, the laughter of children and the soft rustle of leaves. Jin knew that this was only the beginning of a long and wondrous journey. He had changed the world, not through power alone, but through wisdom, bravery, and compassion. The boy who had once swept stables now walked among legends, the protector of dragons and humanity alike, a true hero in a world that would never forget his name. Jin woke to the gentle warmth of the morning sun, stretching as he listened to the sounds of the valley. Dragons moved gracefully, wings beating softly, and the wind carried the scent of flowers and grass. Jin felt a deep sense of peace. He had come far from the days of cleaning stables, yet he knew there was still work to do. His journey was not yet over. Today, Jin planned to explore a distant mountain range rumored to hold dragons that had never been seen by humans. He mounted Gurium, who shifted and flexed its wings, ready for flight. The smaller dragons followed, forming a protective circle around Jin and Gurium. The wind rushed past as they soared high into the sky, the villages and rivers below shrinking into tiny dots. Hours passed as they flew over forests, rivers, and valleys. Jin marveled at the world below, feeling the freedom of the skies and the strength of the dragons beneath him. He leaned forward, speaking softly to Gurium, guiding him over hidden currents and safe mountain passes. Each journey brought new lessons, both about dragons and about himself. As they approached the mountains, Gene noticed smoke rising from a distant valley. His heart tightened. Humans again. He could see a small group of soldiers setting up traps and looking for dragons. Gene signaled to Gurium, who let out a low, warning roar. The smaller dragons tensed, ready to protect the valley. Jin's mind raced. He had to protect the dragons without unnecessary conflict. Gene devised a plan. He instructed the dragons to create illusions, making it appear as though there were more dragons than there actually were. Leaves and dust swirled into the air as they swooped and moved with precision. The soldiers looked up in fear and confusion, unsure where to go. Gene guided the dragons carefully, keeping the humans away from the mountain paths that led to the dragon sanctuaries. The leader of the soldiers, a man named Byung-ho, shouted orders, trying to maintain control. Gene knew brute force would not work here. He directed Gurium to use his size and power to create barriers and confusion, while the smaller dragons distracted the humans from a safe distance. Within hours, the soldiers were retreating, leaving the mountains untouched. Gene felt relief and pride. The dragons had followed his guidance, trusting his leadership. After ensuring the valley was safe, Gene explored the mountains with Gurium and the other dragons. He discovered hidden caves filled with crystals that glowed softly, pools of water with magical properties, and ancient stone carvings that told stories of dragons and humans living in harmony long ago. Gene ran his hands over the carvings, feeling a pulse of magic beneath the stone. Each discovery deepened his understanding of the dragons and their history. During their exploration, they encountered a wounded dragon trapped under fallen rocks. Gene called for help, and together, the dragons lifted the heavy stones. The small dragon looked at Gene with gratitude, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility. Leadership was not about power, he realized, but about protecting those who relied on you and making choices that kept them safe. Gene spent days training with the dragons, learning to anticipate their movements, to communicate through subtle gestures, and to understand their moods. He guided them through the mountains, teaching younger dragons to fly, and helping older dragons heal from past injuries. Each day strengthened the bond between Gene and the dragons, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. Word of Jin's deeds continued to spread. Humans traveled from distant lands to witness the boy who had earned the respect of dragons. Many came with curiosity and a desire to learn, not to conquer. Gene welcomed those who sought understanding, teaching them the importance of respect, harmony, and coexistence with the dragons. He became a guide, showing that courage, wisdom, and compassion could change hearts and minds. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Gene stood with Gurium and the other dragons on a high cliff. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple. He reflected on his journey, from a humble stable boy to a leader recognized by both dragons and humans. He had faced fear, greed, and danger, and had grown stronger, wiser, and compassionate. Gene spoke softly to Gurium. "We've done much, but there is still more to learn. There are dragons to protect, humans to teach, and lands to explore. We will continue together." The dragon responded with a gentle rumble, a sound of agreement and loyalty. Gene understood that their partnership was the key to the future. In the following weeks, Gene led expeditions to discover hidden dragon sanctuaries, teaching humans to respect them and helping dragons recover from old wounds. He negotiated carefully, using intelligence and empathy to prevent conflicts. The dragons responded eagerly, showing their cleverness and willingness to work together. Gene marveled at their intelligence and understood that the bond between humans and dragons was built on trust, respect, and cooperation. Gene knew that the journey was not without challenges. There would always be humans who sought to exploit the dragons, and dragons who were wary of humans. Yet he felt ready, confident in his ability to guide and protect. He had learned that true leadership was not about fear or dominance, but about understanding, compassion, and the ability to inspire others. One morning, Gene saw dragons fly in the distance, some familiar and some new. They seemed to acknowledge him, even the oldest and wisest dragons bowing slightly. Gene felt pride and humility. He realized that his journey had touched the hearts of many creatures, shaping a future where humans and dragons could coexist peacefully. Years passed, and Jin's legend grew. He remained humble, never forgetting the stable where he had begun, and the simple life that taught him patience and resilience. Dragons continued to soar above the mountains and valleys, free and respected. Humans had learned to coexist, to listen, and to honor the ancient creatures. Jin's name was spoken with respect, not as a conqueror, but as a protector and guide. Gene stood on a cliff with Gurium, looking at the thriving valley below. He smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility, but also the joy of accomplishment. He had begun as a simple stable boy, overlooked and underestimated. Through courage, understanding, and trust, he had become someone even ancient dragons bowed to. The wind carried the sounds of dragons in the distance, the laughter of children and the rustle of leaves. Gene knew that this was only the beginning of a long and wondrous journey. He had changed the world not through force alone, but through wisdom, bravery, and compassion. The boy who had once swept stables now walked among legends, the protector of dragons and humans alike, a hero whose story would endure for generations.